Okay, we are live. Welcome to our weekly basic income discussion group. We're in a different room tonight. And the topic tonight is Italy. So Italy recently started putting into place a new social assistance program, which they're calling citizens' income, except they're doing it in Italian. But a lot of people have been comparing this to universal basic income, and a lot of universal basic income proponents have been saying, hey, look, there's this country that's trying this thing that is similar to a universal basic income. So there's some controversy over how similar it actually is, and we read a couple articles tonight, and we're going to be talking about what we think about it, whether it's a good program, whether it's really basic income, and maybe what the difference is. So I know not everyone has read the articles, so let's start by going around saying, what kinds of things would a social assistance program in a country need to do to kind of teach us anything or be comparable to a basic income, teach us anything about basic income, or be comparable. And what are some kind of maybe major disqualifiers that kind of make it useless and maybe you should, kind of eliminate it from the basic income conversation. I need to plug in my computer.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it depends on what you want to know about basic income, right? So if what you want to know is just, for example, how people spend money that they're going to get, I guess even then it depends on whether it's short-term or long-term. So different things that I would look for is whether there are any conditions attached to the money, how many people it goes to, especially in like a given region or in the whole country, and if there's an expectation that people can trust that it's likely to continue for a long period of time or for the rest of their lives, because the impact I think will be really, really different depending on those kinds of things. So I guess those would be like you learn more and more about a basic income if it's like they expect it to last pretty much indefinitely, it's unconditional, and it goes to everyone. And like I guess the closer you are to those things, the more you can learn. And beyond that, it kind of depends on the question. So for example, if you give a small number of people unconditional income that they can expect to continue forever, you'll learn about how individuals spend money under those conditions, and you won't learn about macroeconomic effects.
Yeah.
As an example. Yeah.
Okay.
Depends.
Elizabeth?
I think you like a much more thoughtful version of my answer. I was like, if it's basic income, then it tells you things about them. If it's not, it doesn't. I sort of thought further. I was like, oh, as you were talking about me, I was like, oh, right, yeah, those things specifically that. So like if it, and the first thing I thought was sort of like, well, okay, if it's paid out to everyone regardless, that feels like, and if that feels like a first order, like how you need to make it comparable to basic income. Although I suppose, like to Bethany's point, like if you're trying to test very specific things, you could maybe do other things that would give you some relevant data, but it feels like okay to go to everyone. Then we get into like the more nuanced questions that we talked about before, like well, how much can you learn if it's just a small locality?
Yeah, right.
Like if it's just one city or one state, like how.
Right.
But it feels like whatever your population is, it needs to go to everyone without strings attached. And I appreciate your point about also like, do people know it's going to end or expect it's going to end?
Yeah, right.
Or not, because you get very different behavior. If it's like, okay, I'm going to have this for a year, like people are like to just save up that money,
exactly,
or maybe just blow it all. Like,
right.
But probably a pretty bimodal distribution, and not a lot of people being like, oh yes, I will. Move back to part-time and invest in my woodworking business.
Right.
Like, because maybe some people will do that, but if you expect short-term, especially on how short-term, like,
yeah, exactly.
If it's like we're committed for 5 years, that's a much longer time horizon than like 9 months.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point.
Richard?
Well, the recent Canada experiment was committed for 3 years, and they only ended it after one. So, and well, the outgoing, governor, I guess you would call her, of the province. She said, "I wish I would have done it at the beginning of my term, so we would have been able to go through out." So, and also in Finland, the prime minister or whatever had only did it towards the end of her term, and if she was voted out, or he, I don't remember what, but they were planning on continuing it after the pilot, but a new government was voted in, which would happen in both Canada and Finland. So you need to have it during the beginning of your term, or you have a reasonable expectation of being voted back in. Otherwise, it's, well, what everyone else said.
Yeah.
Okay. Steve, any thoughts?
From the articles, it made it sound like the Italy experiment won't be an interesting experiment because it's where there's a work requirement and there's a means testing, and so they have to add to their bureaucracy just to see if everybody's playing by the rules. So it seemed to have all the bad things thrown in there.
Yeah, I think that's right. Pretty much everything Bethany listed. The Italy program does not pass the test. So we've got, I think you guys are going to be pretty disappointed as you hear more about this. But we can talk about some of these individual things like means testing, work requirements, citizenship requirements, the various kind of conditions that this program has on it. And we can talk about, how adding any one of these things to something that would otherwise be a basic income program would change the picture, and whether any of them have any maybe positive effects or anything like that. We read two articles today, or there are two articles that we're going to be looking at today.
Can I ask a question before
Yeah,
we
go
get
ahead.
into this? So I read like part of this one.
Yeah.
Why is this being compared to basic income? Like, because when I was reading this one, it seemed much more similar to traditional welfare programs than it did to basic income. So I guess I was kind of like confused.
Yeah, right. So it's very interesting. Why is it being compared to basic income?
Yeah. Do you know?
Yeah, and I think part of the reason is because Italy didn't have a social assistance program like this until recently.
Oh, really?
They didn't really have direct cash assistance. So I mean, like, one of the things that people emphasize with basic income is that it's a direct cash transfer. So this is a direct cash transfer. It's just not the kind of direct cash transfer that that is universal and free of means testing and other conditions.
More like TAMP in the U.S.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Like which program?
TAMP?
Temporary assistance for needy families.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just didn't know the acronym. And I guess
go ahead.
answer my own question now that I know a little more. Like, it's more similar in the sense that we have various programs, but they cover smaller segments of the population. Like, welfare doesn't go to everybody who's out of work. You have kind of like a mix of unemployment. I don't know exactly what welfare refers to. Like, you have assistance to parents, or maybe that's what TAMP is. Is that like assistance to parents, basically?
You get more if you're a parent.
Right. Maybe thinking of WIC, though.
Oh, maybe. There's a lot of different. Right.
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of my point.
For proving your point.
It's like there's a lot of different programs, and they only cover little patches, and lots of people would have nothing that any of those things would cover.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, this is like covering more people. But I still think of it as like an expansive welfare program. And I wonder if in like Europe, they have other programs that are already kind of like this for their welfare program.
They do, and that's part of the point that's made in the article. And one of the points that one of the articles is an interview with Philippe Van Parijs, who's a basic income advocate from Belgium, and he was saying that part of the reason they are not drawing enough of a distinction between the Italy citizens' income and a basic income is because his argument is that in order to really understand the benefits of basic income, you have to have experience with one of these more traditional means tested conditional social assistance programs to understand like what the drawbacks of that are, and then you can see like what the benefits would be of basic income. I don't know that you necessarily need that in order to understand basic income, but that's kind of one of the points he's making.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because of the efficiency concerns.
Because of the efficiency.
Because like the inefficiencies in the other system or something, you would then start to understand.
Yeah, that a lot of times it just doesn't get the results that you want in terms
right.
of helping your society be
Right.
less poor and more prosperous and
I
that
see,
kind of
I see,
thing.
I see.
Yeah.
I feel like you could still go from nothing to basic income and see getting the results and hence appreciate it.
You could, but I think he's saying that you might not know that that's the right thing to do.
Oh, versus other options.
You might intuitively think, oh, well, we should really target the people who need it the
Totally,
most,
yeah.
Optimize our resource usage, that kind of thing. Like that's really intuitive for most people. It's like, well, why should rich people get this? Why don't we give the money to the poor
Right.
people because they're the ones who need it, that kind of thing.
Totally.
So that's kind of like the starting
I see.
point for a lot of people.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one more point.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's also interesting, like the degree to which your country's bureaucracy or your country's government works well or not well is, I guess, another factor that affects the value of basic income versus other programs. Like I hadn't really thought about that before, but I guess I don't know a lot about Italy, but it's arguing that they're not maybe so good at implementing things governmentally, and so in that context, I imagine you benefit even more from a really simple program. And I guess Sultan has mentioned this before with respect to corruption also. Like the more straightforward the program is, the harder it is to like game it with corruption.
Yeah.
Like, for example, you don't necessarily have the sway as a government official to say like, oh, you get to be categorized as like the person who gets it, and like I'll just like fix the books or like, use my sway. I don't know what people,
Right.
Various kinds of like corruption can seep in the more complexity it has to.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
And I think Italy has some trouble with corruption too, but I don't
Yeah.
know all the details.
So Mitchell on the live stream asks an important question, which is, what are the qualifications for receiving it?
Oh,
So that's a good question, Mitchell. And I have this little fact box here
Yeah.
that tells us.
Yeah, you have to make under. Yeah, I just read
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
So who is eligible? Eligibility depends on income, savings, and property ownership. A single person living in rented accommodation with no income and minimal savings can receive a maximum of 9,360 euros per year or 780 euros per month. Of this, 280 of the euros must be used for rent or 150 for a mortgage. So some of it is even like you're restricted in how you can spend it. It's more of kind of an in-kind benefit. Someone who already has an income but below 780 euros per month will have it topped up to, yeah, I know, right? Will have it topped up to this threshold, which is considered the poverty line for a single person paying rent. So there's clearly no incentive for anyone to get a job that pays any less because your total income won't change.
Yeah, there's so many
yeah.
different issues.
Also,
So it implies that you have an incentive against saving too.
Yes, because if you save money, you get less of the benefit. That's right.
Right.
So a family of 2 adults and a child in rented accommodation can receive up to 1,080 euros, while a family of 2 adults and 3 children can get up to 1,280 euros. Homeowners do not receive the standard rental contribution, which is 280 euros.
But don't they receive a mortgage contribution or something?
Yeah, they receive. Yeah, I guess so.
It's
So
like it seems like even this paragraph doesn't explain everything because like it implies certain things.
yeah, this paragraph doesn't explain everything.
Right.
And you also have to have been resident in Italy for 10 years. I was just skimming
Oh,
the
cool.
article.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
nothing
it says
on the
that.
fact sheet.
Right.
It says that at the
Oh,
bottom
yeah,
there.
conditions.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah. So,
Oh yeah, it says the savings thing. Down
yeah,
there, too.
I mean, there's more. Yeah, I haven't finished reading all this stuff, but it's interesting that it's not paid on an individual basis either. It's kind of paid per household, and they're like, oh, well, how many people do you have in your household? How many kids do you have?
Right.
And then your household gets a certain amount. So it's not like so in that way, it's also not like basic income because it's not paid on an individual basis.
Which means
Oh,
that
it's on a
women
household basis.
Yeah.
Which means that women could be trapped in an abusive relationship, or
Well, if they left,
Well,
they'd get the single benefit. I
If
think.
they left, they'd become their own household, right?
So they'd actually earn more. I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a disincentive against being a couple. Actually,
It's a disincentive against being a couple.
8,000
yeah.
is way less than 2 times 6,000.
Right, so you might save money on having shared expenses, but then you get less money, so that kind of cancels that out a little
Well,
bit.
but how do they know you're a couple? It probably just means you don't get married or file as a couple or something.
Well, I mean, that's an important point too. Like, how do they know anything? You have to
Right.
report all this stuff, right? How do they know your income? Well, you have to report your income,
Right.
right? So there's that issue too. Now there's an incentive to
There's
not
so
record a lot of
many
stuff.
changes in
Yeah.
incentives, most of which you probably don't want.
right.
Like, for example, people are now incentivized. Let's say they can tell where you live. As a couple, you're incentivized to live apart, which is inefficient, so that you
Right.
can get, more money. Or like,
You can live
there's
as
just so
like
many
roommates
things.
or something.
You could live with other roommates, but if you're a couple, you get less money, so you wouldn't want to live with your partner. However they decide that, or you wouldn't want to get married, or I don't know how they decide that you're
Right, or maybe
couple.
you're married but not officially, or something like that.
right. So there's that, and then there's like the incentive against saving, the incentive against different kinds of work that you might want to do, especially
Yeah.
right around
Do
the
they have
threshold.
common law marriages in Italy? Because if they don't, then you could just live with your partner.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good partner. For sure.
Yeah, so there's, I mean, no matter what the answers to these questions are, it's still like, it still creates an incentive to not,
Right. It
not-
might be an incentive against property ownership. I can't quite tell how
Right.
those work out.
yeah, I mean, like what counts as savings, that kind of stuff. So that's a
Right.
good question. So the next paragraph is interesting too. How is it paid? The money will be loaded onto a digital card at the start of each month and expires at the end of the month if it has not been spent. Labor Minister Luigi Di Maio says this will ensure a boost to consumer spending and economic growth. So sure, of course it will, right? So if you want people to spend money, you can say your money is going to disappear at the end of the month. That forces them to spend the money. Another way you can get people to spend money is to give them more money. If you want them to spend more.
Also,
yeah.
if you can get around that by just buying something, then returning it, just getting cash for it.
Yeah, and there so there are ways around this
So many
too, right? Like you
workarounds,
could, if I spend like how can this money be spent? Does it have to be at like registered merchants who can accept payment using these cards? Kind of like here we have the EBT cards. Like I can't pay Bethany with my EBT card. That's the electronic benefits transfer, and that's food stamps, but it also is used for direct cash benefits like TANF and stuff like that. So I can't pay Bethany using my EBT card. So this isn't just money you can spend on anything because if I'm getting my citizen's income in Italy and I pay Richard, does that count as me having spent the money? And if so, then we can just give each other's money and now it's not going to expire or something like that.
Right.
So it creates all this weird stuff.
It does, although those seem the easiest to handle, I guess.
Easiest to handle in terms of you have to spend it at a business that.
No, I just mean like I don't like this distortion of incentives either, but like at least people will probably be able to find workarounds. Like the only people that would be super affected are people who really don't want to spend. This is their only source of income, and they don't want to spend that much each month or something like that.
Right. So I mean, people either find workarounds or they'll make it so hard to do these kinds of things that most people won't be working around it. They'll just be spending the money normally, right?
Right, but I guess that's only a problem if you didn't want to spend that much money.
Right.
You know how it says the savings? Could you just like buy stock or something like that with all your extra money, and they wouldn't be able to? Do they mean like savings in your bank, or do they just buy stock in or?
Yeah, I mean these are all great questions, and in enforcing this, they have to figure all this out. I don't know what the details are of this,
Right.
but yeah, I mean if you want someone who has a lot of wealth not to receive this, even if they're not receiving an income, then you have to have a way of factoring in all the different assets that someone has.
Right.
Yeah.
I also wonder like what the rationale is for some of these restrictions. Like that one, it's clear what the rationale is, but what about the one where you have to spend it on rent? Like, are they worried people? What are they worried people would otherwise do? Like if they didn't add that restriction, you know what I mean?
They might be worried that it's really hard to kick people out. It's really hard to evict people from where they're living,
So
and
maybe
that's
that's
really
a
frustrating
problem.
for landlords. So
Yeah.
maybe you get your 10,000 euros or per year, or your 780 euros per month, and you're like, man, I really need to buy all these things I need, and I can't afford to pay rent, so I'm just not going to pay rent. And it's really hard for them to kick me out. So maybe it's an
Right.
incentive for forcing people to actually
That could be.
pay rent. Yeah.
I see.
So I think that's probably the justification for that. Yeah.
Can I ask you about the digital cards in
Yeah.
general?
Yeah.
Assuming that the poor are less likely to be in the banking system, have banking services. Does the digital card or does that make it easier for them to, or does it automatically put them into a banking system where they can get normal banking services?
So
Oh,
not necessarily, but go
But
ahead.
with
Richard.
banking cards, they like the ones they have at like CVS and thing or Walmart, you have to pay like 75 cents per transaction. Do they have transaction costs?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, Steve, the answer is generally no, that it doesn't have to work that way. And EBT cards do not work that way in the United States. You have a card and its balance gets updated in their system. And if you don't have a bank account, you can, call in you can call in and find out what your balance is. And maybe you can go on the website and find out what your balance is.
And at the end of like receipts, they have the how much you have left on it.
Right.
Oh yeah.
That's
So it's
right.
like a gift card, like a Starbucks gift card that works a lot.
Right.
Of
It's
places.
not like a full bank account.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it,
I'm just fantasizing then that you have your card, but behind it is like a savings account
right.
where if you actually save, you actually get some
Right.
some interest on your savings, and you get a bit of you form a credit rating based on if you overdrawn your card or something like that, and you sort of slowly get into a small form of regular banking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be the way to go. I would be
They
proposing
don't
that.
even like savings.
They don't seem to be that into savings.
Yeah,
I wonder
No,
if it was
yeah.
a political thing, like in order to get it passed, they had to get the support of a lot of businesses who were like hoping to get the money from these people or something. I don't know why it's so anti-savings, but
It could be, and it could be, that they want to get the economy going, and they're hoping that by getting people to spend the money, that will create more jobs in the economy and get people off the system faster, that kind of thing.
right, because it's seen as more of a ideally a temporary thing.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing about this is it's not seen as like a permanent for the rest of your life income that you get. It's seen as a way to kind of like get you help back into the economy so you can get a job because that's the way it's supposed to be.
It's gonna create like a huge discontinuity in wages probably. Because like just above 780 euros a month, I'm like, really? I can work a full-time job and make $5 extra versus,
Right.
so it's like you're gonna have to pay me like double that or something practically
Right.
before I take a job.
And of course, the way they try to get around this is through the work requirements, right?
Oh, right. I forgot about
Yeah.
that. That's
Yeah. So it's like, oh, people aren't going to want to work.
but then you still
what if
have a
we
huge
force them
incentive to
work?
like fake that you're trying or like to make yourself ineligible for jobs that don't pay that much.
Yeah, I
more.
mean, when I was on,
or be part of the black market.
or
Yeah. Exactly. Have off the table
yeah,
jobs.
and when I was on food stamps here in the United States, they had a work requirement, or you had to like apply for a certain number of jobs, and
Right.
so I just applied for jobs I knew I wasn't going to get, and
Right.
then I was done.
It's
I
really
met
hard
the
to
requirement,
monitor.
but
It's like so that to the extent that that's happening, it would still create a wage in
right,
a
yeah,
gap unless you're doing like a black market kind of job.
Yeah.
That's
I can
interesting.
can understand that the rich people don't want to give the poor people money that they don't need immediately this month.
That might be the
So that's
rationale,
just
yeah.
one step away from, we're
Right.
just going to force them to spend it this month, and the poor people aren't going to complain about that because they have to at least pretend they needed it all immediately.
Right.
And
Right.
so the problem sort of is
Yeah.
assumed to go away.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. And you can think about if they really don't need it, then they won't spend it, and that saves money for the program or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll probably you could spend things and like sell them to your friends, like Richard.
Guarantee
said, too.
they'll find ways.
Yeah,
to
I mean
spend
that's
it.
what I mean. Like
Yeah.
that's why that one was the one I figured people would get around the most because like there's so many ways I can think of that you could get around it. It's a pain though. Like you have to put in extra effort.
Yeah, I mean they'll get around it.
It's
It
inefficient.
depends what you mean by get around it. If get around it by buying stuff you don't need is a way to get around it, then
It's
yeah,
inefficient.
they'll
Like
do
you'll
that.
buy things you might not need, or you'll like buy things to sell
Right.
to your friends, but it's not exactly what they would have bought, or like
Right.
there'll be like a rush at the end, like what am I going to
Well, it
spend this
seems like you
on?
could just buy Italian cash. You could buy lira.
You would try,
You
yeah?
put
Could
them in
you?
little bags that say broccoli or something, but it's basically a bag of lira.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's actually going to be euros though today.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess it depends on how it's monitored too. Like we said, like we don't know if you can only spend it at certain stores for certain
Right.
things, or like
And then businesses have to be compliant on that end. So you're probably not going to be able to get away with doing something like that, at least at any kind of
Right.
scale or anything like that.
But secondary, like complicated secondary markets could spring up if
Yeah.
a lot of people have excess money in different months. I don't know if that will actually happen.
Yeah, I mean, you could sell your benefit card to someone on the black market,
Right. Yeah.
and then they could
definitely.
use it to buy stuff
Right.
that they wanted to buy, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
that kind of thing happens in the United States too with food stamps and all of that. Yeah, it's like, I'll give you this $150 worth of food if you give me 100 regular dollars, and then there are people willing to take that deal. And, yeah.
Actually, they buy a bunch of soda or something like that, and then they sell it for like 60 cents on the dollar or less.
Oh, right. That's another way to do it.
Right. Yep. That's another way to do it, or batteries or something like that. Yeah. There's a whole. I read a thing about how batteries are used as kind of like a black market currency. And,
Really?
like AA batteries. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
How weird.
Yep. So conditions, or you guys have anything you want to say before I keep reading?
I don't know. Just like I don't know. I think.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the benefit is not available to single people with savings over 6,000 euros or couples with savings over 8,000 euros, or those who own a second home worth more than 30,000 euros. So that's an interesting point, because they're saying you can own a home, and you can even own a second home as long as it's not worth more than 30,000 euros. So if you have some savings, you can.
It's hard for me to understand these amounts because I'm trying to think what the prices are like in Italy. Because 30,000 euros is pretty darn cheap for a home. What home would be less than that?
Maybe a small condo or something.
Oh, like a trailer.
A trailer, something in the rural areas, that
Okay.
kind of thing. Yeah. Maybe you have a trailer or a mobile home, or I don't know, something like that. But this suggests a way to get around the savings restriction, is that you buy a home, you have 6,000, or say you have 20,000 euros, and that makes you in savings, and that makes you not qualify for the benefit. Maybe you put it into a home,
Right.
and now you still have the savings. It's just not liquid money anymore.
Oh, I know
and
what I
you
was
still
going
get
to
the
say
benefit.
before.
Yeah.
Like this, there's so many conditions to this. It's going to be so complicated to monitor too.
Yep.
Like really complicated. And I guess I'm just not used to looking at this kind of thing because I'm sure the current situations in the U.S. are really, really similar.
Yes.
But it just seems like a lot of things like that. Each one, I'm like, how are they going to know that? Like, how are they going to monitor that?
Yeah.
Like with the what you're spending it on rent, even like how are they figuring that out? It seems really complicated.
Yeah.
Well, there are or soon
Yeah.
will be some surveillance nations.
Yeah,
like, I
that's
don't
true.
know, China or Singapore or
Right, it'd be easier.
one of the other benign dictatorships where the data really will be available to do this kind of monitoring.
It's true. If you could have an algorithm or something that figures it out, yeah.
And it forces everybody to play by the rules. That I can
Right.
understand, but I understand that Italy is a bit behind on tight bureaucracy and surveillance and
Yeah.
all of that kind of.
Right.
Yeah. It's could you really? I guess could you really have enough surveillance to be able to catch up with?
Yeah. I mean, let's say that if you participated in this program, you have to give over all your bank statements to their algorithm or something as a condition, and then algorithm probably figure out who's a landlord and how much money you're giving to him for that piece at least, and other financials and stuff.
Oh, that's even farther than. I don't think you even need to go that far, but I was wondering. Yeah, I mean, the algorithm. I mean, so all payments are in the system. There's no you're always gonna have an informal economy, right?
Well, this doesn't get into the side dealings and stuff, but at least you could have the official dealings tracked, as opposed to having to send in forms to a person.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of sending in forms to a person right now, and that seems
Right.
really inefficient.
I think what Steve was getting at was that you could literally just watch everyone's activity.
Oh,
so
maybe that was
even
going
the informal,
farther.
even the stuff that attempts to be informal economy, or you're trying to get around stuff, that could all be
Right.
monitored because you have video surveillance.
China does their
Yeah.
social credit score.
Yeah.
Right.
It must involve some real world surveillance.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think it involves people
Reporting on
ratting
each
each other
other.
out.
Yeah.
And they use CCTV cameras.
Yeah. But you also, I think, get points for saying, oh, this person, drove through a crosswalk
Right.
or something.
Which is
like
a
that.
classic way that
Yeah.
surveillance has been done. That can actually be very effective without technology.
Yeah.
You just get you incentivize people to rat each other out, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just taught on a class on cults, or an individual class, not a whole class. So yeah.
Yeah.
But not just in cults, but the cults typically do this, right? And, anyway.
Okay. So non-EU immigrants must have lived in Italy for the last 10 years. So that, of course, presents the whole problem of now are you creating a whole immigrant underclass that is working all the jobs that pay less than 780 euros.
That's definitely going to happen.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, like, we know this is going to happen and we see it
Well, they're like basically saying we want this. I mean, you're basically all but saying that they want that to happen. Or that's a very predictable consequence of the economics of the situation.
Well, I mean, like, we look at all these things and we can see all these predictable consequences, right? And these predictable consequences are things that are generally not desirable in an economy. And yet they're doing it.
Well, maybe they feel like the benefits outweigh the costs, and we haven't really talked about that yet.
Yeah.
All the people that are helped and not going hungry and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Well, is Andrew Yang intending to have a citizenship or residency requirement?
Yeah, and I think that might be a problem with his policy. Yeah.
Right, but a difference. So that could be a problem for sure. But what's different about this is that if you make over a certain amount, you don't get it. So all the jobs paying less than that amount, or like paying around that amount, are going to be worked by a certain group of people who don't get it. But Andrew Yang's is unconditional. So if I'm getting his freedom dividend, I could still want to work this lower paying job in this situation. So that was a specific thing I was pointing out. And like in this situation, you wouldn't want to work this job. Like you don't want to work a job that I could just not work and get the same amount of money.
So it doesn't have that part.
If I were an American nativist, maybe I would like it that only people who are citizens or have a social security number or whatever, they're the only ones who get the freedom dividend.
Right.
And everybody else is, well, all the immigrants are even lower than they were before, and I'm even higher than I was before.
Yeah.
Maybe some Americans would like that.
Yeah.
I think some Americans do like that. Yeah. In terms of whether they'd actually be better off in a world where you've got all these poor people who are still poor and struggling, probably not. And then, you can ask the question, if people's incomes are secure and they don't have to worry about themselves as much, are they going to be as tribal? Are they going to have as many of these
and
kind
what
of...
about their American-born children? How do the children get a citizen's income or
freedom dividend?
If they get it, but their parents wouldn't get it, so their children wouldn't benefit either.
Well, the freedom dividend itself, are you talking about Italy now, or are you talking about Andrew Yang?
Andrew Yang.
So that only kicks in when you're 18.
So if you're born here, you
wouldn't
get
anything. They wouldn't.
Right, so that's right.
Yeah.
And he also has a path to citizenship for immigrants, which by no coincidence takes 18 years. So
interesting.
you become a full citizen after 18 years if that's because you were born and then it took the 18 years, or you're an immigrant and then it took the 18 years. That's when you start getting your basic income.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, but I wonder, like, politically, this might have been important, this thing about immigrants or residents, for getting it passed in Italy too, right?
Yeah. So I mean, in Italy, it's a per household thing. So it's never going to go to children anyway. The child would have to be its own household, and that's not something that's going to happen.
Right.
And then Italy and the European countries in general, I don't think have this. If you're born there, you're a citizen unusual. Automatically. Yeah. I think that's very unique to the United States.
Super unusual.
So you can have people who are. I mean, here they're going to give it to people who have immigrated if they've been there for at least 10 years. So that's
right.
If there's a kid who's not a citizen, but then he's been there for 10 years, then
as an adult
he'll get it as an adult when he's running his own household.
Do you know if Italy is trying to increase the birth rate or decrease it, or they don't care?
I don't think they have a strong
because I know a few European countries I thought were worried about it.
Yeah, I think like Norway maybe and Sweden. Yeah.
Because I noticed that. I mean, it's complicated because they said it wasn't really enough, but you do get more money the more kids you have. I remember we talked in our basic income discussions about like how basic income relates to the incentives to have more or less kids if you are interested in population growth or you want population to grow or whatever direction you might be interested in it. So and I know a few European countries are unusual in the sense that they feel that theirs too small. of one,
Yeah.
so I don't know if that was
Yeah, and this is also, Japan and South Korea are trying to encourage people to have more children.
right.
Yeah. Um,
You get proportionally less per child, though. for
You
the
do,
farm.
yeah. So I don't
Yeah.
know exactly how those incentives work out.
Yes, it
Um,
seems like it's like not, it doesn't seem like it's trying to encourage you to have a lot of kids.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I think because it's targeted at poor people, and so,
Right.
like, I don't know what Italy's called, like, what the political discourse is about about population, but
Right.
my guess is that as with everywhere, the poor people are not the people that
you want
People
more
are-
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
decision makers are excited about reproducing.
Right.
They're like, oh yes, we think that like the rich, like productive citizens should be the ones who are
Right.
continuing to replicate themselves.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, thanks
So
for answering those questions.
yeah, recipients who are able to work must do 8 hours community service per week, do any training courses proposed, and to take one of the first 3 job offers that match their qualifications.
How
So
do they get how do they apply for the jobs though? Because I'm wondering about like what you were saying about just applying for jobs you're not going to get.
Oh, they said that you have to be within like 100 miles within the first 6 months or 3 months, and then like 250, and then I don't know.
I think I think the idea is that they have these training courses, right?
Oh, and then you get
And
jobs
then
out of those.
You get job offers out of that.
those.
Like they'll connect the training courses up with the employers
So you
and say,
can't
"Hey,
just,
look at all
like-
these workers we just created."
You can't
Yeah.
dodge it.
That's I think the idea. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It might be a good time for me to ask my general question about job requirements, work requirements.
Yeah.
If the economy needed more employees,
Mhm.
unskilled employees, then they would just hire them.
Yes.
And then even if you were giving basic income, the unskilled people receiving basic income would be more likely to get a job or want a job because the economy needs more workers.
Yeah. When the economy needs more workers, they're willing to pay more to get people to work. So the labor market is a market, and you'll pay whatever you need to pay to get the work done. Yeah.
Right. But if the economy is at nearly full employment and doesn't need the workers, then why would you want to force anybody to get a job when the economy doesn't want to give you one?
Well, I wouldn't. But a lot of people feel that this is the way the economy is supposed to work. You're supposed to earn your money through a job. That's just like the way it is. So you hear proposals for things like in the United States, a lot of people are talking about a federal jobs guarantee. So we'll literally create jobs for people because a lot of people think, well, people need jobs. But is it jobs they need or is it money? And when you're creating jobs for the purpose of giving people money, now you're not creating jobs for the purpose of doing useful work anymore.
One thing that could come out of, I wonder, there's a few thoughts I have about the combination of this condition and the company incentives. So one thing that could happen if there just aren't that many jobs is that they'll notice that people are going through these training programs and not enough jobs are being offered to them. You've got a situation with observability where you're forcing people to take jobs that they're offered, forcing them to do training. So that would make it visible if the jobs kind of aren't there. Or maybe they would do other things to kind of try to prop up the jobs.
So in particular in Italy, they claim that there's a labor shortage in the north of Italy. There's a labor shortage, yeah. And obviously, can there really ever be such a thing as a labor shortage if you're paying people, if you're paying people enough to get them to work, then whatever that level of wages is kind of like the...
I think there can be a labor shortage.
Well, what do you mean by labor shortage then?
What I mean is well, let me try to spell it out. Let's imagine every single person, child to old person, is doing using their time maximally productively all the time for money, and there's still other stuff you would like to have done, but there's just no more people. If you had more people, you would do it.
So that's not typically what we mean when we talk about a shortage. A shortage means that at the current rate, there just aren't any more people to hire. So what you would do is you would raise the rate until you no longer want to hire people at that rate, and then the amount of people you want employed at that wage
Right.
equals the number of people who are
I
willing to work at
understand.
that
I
wage.
understood
And then
where
it's not technically a shortage anymore.
I understood where you were going with
Yeah.
it, but I was
Yeah.
just saying, like, it is possible. Like, that's what I would think of as an extreme example, and then you can kind of like extrapolate down from that.
Yeah, and I mean, but the thing is, what you say is always going to be true, right? It's like, well, if people were willing to work for free, I'd have them do all this stuff. If you know, if people were willing to give me money in order to be able to do a certain kind of work, yeah, maybe I'd take that money and let them do that work, that kind of thing. So it's really hard to define a shortage by saying just there's more work that needs to be done.
I mean, it's hard,
Yeah.
but it still seems like a true concept, even though it's really hard to like measure or pin down. Like, I guess there's always more stuff you could do, but it depends on how you define like what production level you want. But
yeah, and I mean, I think that's why, when we look at these things, we have to be looking at it not kind of from the bottom up at like what the jobs are. We have to be looking at, well, what's the maximum output we can kind of sustainably get from the economy.
but even
yeah.
that question depends on people's motivation.
Watch out because
sorry.
the microphone.
Even that depends on people's motivation to work, and like
it depends on people's motivation to work. So if it's lower, then you might have a lower maximum.
So what if
sustainable
you're
output.
treating the motivation to work as endogenous rather than exogenous, or like not? I don't know which one it is, but like what if you're trying to manipulate people's motivation to work? Then you don't treat that as like a fixed thing that goes into your productive capacity.
Yeah, so you can find all kind of levers to pull and
Right.
incentives to change to try to boost the output of the economy.
Right, and it seems like that's what they're trying to. They could think of this as doing that, right? Incentivizing more people to work.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't call that a labor shortage, though. You would call that, like we're going to use some kind of economic policy to, to get more output of the economy, get like, or I mean, it's just not
that's
what the
true.
term
But
means.
I guess I'm assuming what you mean by labor shortage is like kind of the answer to what I was saying, which is that if they were to put people in these training programs, they would be offered jobs.
So right. So the idea here is in Italy, when you're talking about like a labor shortage in the north, they have jobs that are going unfilled. When
That's
we're
what I
talking
mean,
about
yeah.
a labor shortage, it usually means there are jobs that are going unfilled. So obviously, if you increased the wages, then either maybe those jobs are no longer viable for you as an employer, so those jobs would disappear. There would no longer be unfilled jobs because the wages would be too high.
Right.
Or it would incentivize more people to work those jobs, and then you've eliminated the shortage.
I
so
understand,
the whole,
but
yeah.
I think there's still the practical point, which is that if you have jobs currently going unfilled, then you can quickly get more people into the possibility of taking those jobs. Then
Right.
there's something for them to take, right?
Yeah, if you have jobs going unfilled and then you force people to work those jobs at the wages that are being offered,
Right.
then that's a way to reduce the shortage without actually increasing wages. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do.
Yes, this is what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's relevant to my question because I was wondering if they would put people through these training programs and then just find that there's no jobs available for them.
Right, and I'm saying that they won't do that, and this is also why they have the stipulation that if you don't find a job in your area, you have to go to a larger area, and if you don't find a job, right.
Yeah.
So that's the part of the idea behind that is to get people in the South to go find a job in the North.
Right.
So the people in the South who need the jobs are going to be filling the jobs in the North where they need workers and they don't want to raise the wages.
It's gonna
And
be
also they have like a 20% unemployment rate in Italy, it said.
In the South or in all of Italy?
I'm not sure. I didn't say. I don't think.
Yeah.
Another thing that will be a discontinuity then is like anybody, well, I don't know. There might be some people who I just realized who could take a job that earns a little bit under whatever they would cap it up to and would do that rather than participating in this program too. Because it's sort of like the flip side. Because this program is pretty onerous.
Yeah.
If you're forced to like move and you're forced to like, you don't want to move or you're forced to like.
Yeah, there's some people who might want to take a job and say like, I'm paying this amount to be able to have more freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just thought about that.
Yeah.
And,
I think it's a good point.
one more thing I was going to say is that they are also kind of stacking the deck for the people who are in the program to get the jobs rather than whoever's out of the program, because the company also gets this incentive for hiring somebody in the program over somebody out of the program.
Can you say the first part again?
Yeah, so a company gets money if they hire someone in this program.
Yes.
So if a company is indifferent between two people, one who's in the program and one who's not, they're going to hire someone in the program.
Yeah, if they really, if they're indifferent on all the other dimensions, right?
Right. which will make this program look more successful in some sense. Like even if you had unemployment, it's not going to be among the people in the program.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd notice this effect though, because a lot of times employers will look at a program like this and
They'll
say,
know that it's the people who couldn't.
well, these are the people who couldn't find jobs and
Right.
they're poor, and why are they in this program? And like I'd rather hire someone who didn't have to go through this program, and maybe I'm willing to pay more for that, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on who uses it and how widespread it is and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's a lot of tricky stuff there.
It's a good point.
Let me ask you about people moving to jobs.
Yeah.
I was surprised that the unemployed Appalachian coal miners were unwilling to leave Appalachia to go to, a few hundred miles to whatever solar panel manufacturing jobs.
Right.
Just because their families had been in Appalachia for 100 years and they just didn't want to go.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, Americans are leaving wherever they're from. They're leaving for the big cities, and leaving the small cities for the big cities because all the jobs are collected in the cities.
Yep.
Yeah.
This makes me skeptical that somebody whose family has lived in southern Italy for 1,000, 2,000 years is really all that ready to move up to the north to get a crappy job.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I agree. People
think
can
that's
be
right,
very
yeah.
resistant to moving for
And
sure.
I thought it was a great selling point of standard UBI that people get the money and then they get to stay where in the small town where they are, and maybe even contribute to the revitalization
Right.
of the small town where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it gives people the freedom to live where they want to live. So that could mean the freedom to move if you really wanted to move and you couldn't afford to before, but it can also mean the freedom to stay. So I think, in terms of the people who are moving, you'd start to see those people maybe moving to cheaper areas where their basic income stretches further because it's not tied to a specific location. But there are plenty of people who just want to stay where they are, and that's really hard to kind of change. Yeah.
I think that's right. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
I even know some computer programmers who left Boston for Silicon Valley because they really needed the jobs.
Yeah.
There.
Right.
Silicon Valley got the jobs. Boston didn't quite cut it.
Yeah.
In high technology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you see both effects, right? Some people are willing to move and some people aren't. But I do think that a lot of people would be resistant to moving for sure.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good reasons to stay, like in a given area if you have family there and all this kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the citizen's income can be received continuously for 18 months, after which it is suspended for 1 month, and a new application must be submitted. So it's like you kind of reset the process, and now you have to find a job in the shorter radius, or you have to look for a job in the shorter radius, and so you're basically starting from the beginning.
That resets?
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole new application. It's like a new instance of your participation in this program.
I wonder what the thinking was for that.
Well, I think they certainly want a punishment at the end that you don't get it for a month. You didn't find a job.
Right.
Also, having to go through the application process. I don't know how onerous that is, but it's probably not just clicking a button, right?
Right. It's a disincentive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Plus, they're going to make so many jobs of the people who have to process those applications.
Yeah. Anyone found guilty of trying to defraud the system will face up to 6 years in jail.
Intense.
Yeah. So this is interesting because if it's a really, hard system to implement and enforce, then what counts as trying to defraud the system and what counts as the system's just not working, that kind of stuff. It's a huge blurry gray area, right?
Yeah, I don't know how they'll actually implement that.
Yeah, and it's scary too because if it's really hard to define these things, then does that mean that people who want certain things politically are going to target specific people and
that's what I was talking about with corruption.
Yeah, exactly.
But you'd have to know something about the legal system and the culture because it could make the ambiguity could make it harder to put someone in jail if you had a strong like reasonable doubt kind of standard,
Right.
or it could make it easy to put someone in jail if you're like willing to like not have
Yeah.
such a high standard.
Well, I think it's always going to be both, right? Depending on the situation. Like,
Right, but there's a general way that the legal system will tip in a country too. Like it's not, there's always individual cases, but there's also like a general standard of
I
law.
don't know exactly what that means.
I mean, some countries have reasonable doubt, or like in the U.S., there's civil cases versus other cases. You have different standards
Right.
of evidence, and
That's because
obviously
the
there's
US
ambiguity.
uses a
But
common law system from England, while Italy, I think, uses the Napoleonic law.
oh, interesting. Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you know what the standard of evidence is for that?
I think you're guilty until proven innocent.
So that seems bad for this in terms of ending up in jail. That was kind of my question. Like, obviously there's a lot of ambiguity, but wherever your line is will make a difference on average.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point.
I mean, and there's also like a lot of like fast stuff that happens, even like,
Yeah, of
even in the
course.
US with our like
Mhm.
strong reasonable doubt, whatever, that you
Of
still get
course,
a lot
yeah.
of like, well, can you afford a lawyer?
Right,
Or,
right.
like,
To actually defend
whatever,
you and all of that.
and you
Yeah.
got like people taking plea deals because they're like, oh, well, the alternative seems really bad, and they don't have a good sense of what
Right.
their actual
Right.
like, risk
Yeah.
level is. So
Mhm.
if someone's like,
That's a good point.
you could go to jail for like 50 years, or you can take this plea deal, you're like, I'll definitely take the plea deal.
Right,
Even-
right. Even if you
it
might have
actually-
gotten off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course it's implemented by a jury, so like ultimately it's 12 people, not like
Yeah.
some
Yeah, and it's
so-
not like the bias.
Yeah, yeah.
That, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I don't mean to diminish any of that. I'm just thinking on average there's got to be some signal of whether it's like guilty
Yeah.
until proven innocent or
Yeah.
reasonable
guilty
doubt.
until
Or,
proven innocent seems even worse. in
yeah,
our
exactly. It
system.
seems harder to yeah, or easier to go to jail. I don't know how it's actually implemented, but yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that seems. I suspect this was politically helpful for them, though. And just if I'm guessing, like based on the debates in the U.S. around these kinds of systems, like a lot of the political debate seems to be like very hyper focused on people taking advantage or like frauding, and then a lot of people kind of jump on that bandwagon to be against something, usually without really any hard data about whether it's happening or how much it costs or how much it would cost to not whatever. But you know what I mean. So I wonder if again this was like politically necessary.
Right.
Yes, there was that woman who killed her roommate's boyfriend a few years ago, and she was guilty until proven innocent. She had to serve 6 years in jail or something like that.
Oh wow,
Oh, right. What was her
that
name?
was in Italy, you said.
Oh,
Yeah.
Amanda Knox.
Amanda Knox. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing TV trials in France, and the defendant is in a big cage.
Oh, really?
Really?
Yeah.
What?
Huh.
Oh, that's weird.
That doesn't seem humane.
Seems like that would sway. Speaking of bias, that you.
But if you're guilty until proven innocent, then
It kind of
you're in
makes
jail
sense.
first.
Yeah.
You're released.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So,
Interesting.
company incentives. So we talked about this a little bit. A company that hires someone on the scheme receives the citizen's income that would have gone to the unemployed person for the remainder of the 18-month period. Hence, a company that hires a person who has been on the scheme for 2 months will get the income for 16 months.
Do they have to keep them on in the company for any particular amount of time?
I don't think so.
Because it seems like.
Well, I
a
mean,
good
I think you'd
bracket
stop
otherwise.
getting the benefit. The company would stop getting the benefit.
But what if I
Person
like
was
hire you for 2 years and you're on this program, and then I fire you, and then I hire another guy for 1 year? Then I don't know if they have like.
I mean, I imagine that
Or
that's.
you can-
I don't know if
or
that's
you
really
could,
that profitable, but.
hire someone for the lower than the rate, and then increase their benefits by just to be just over it, and so you get to keep whatever the remainder is for the next 17 months.
Right. So you're saying they would hire them and pay a very small amount.
They probably have a minimum wage in Italy too, I'm guessing.
Well, I imagine that they wouldn't be allowed to hire you for less than the
The
benefit, the
$780.
$780.
Right, because
Hire
otherwise
them-
you could hire them
Hire
for
them for
pennies.
700 and then increase it to 790 or something like that, and then
Right.
you get all the rest of it.
Yeah. So you hire them for $790 and then you get $780 and you have to pay $10 if you're the company. Does that make sense?
Right. But what? I don't understand. Why would you? Oh, because you have to hire them for more than that?
It's higher than for 781.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's just illustrating the point, right?
Right.
You could end up paying almost nothing for a worker.
For that period of time, but that's why I was asking how long they had to keep them on.
I don't think there's any restriction on that.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it would.
But in Europe, it's really onerous to fire someone.
Oh, is it?
Oh,
That's
is
what
that
I was
right?
wondering about. So maybe that's
Oh,
not.
okay.
So maybe they don't want to deal with that. Like
So
they
maybe
wanna find
maybe
a
they're
person.
not as worried about companies doing that because they've already got these other
Yeah.
restrictions in place.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point.
Good point.
Yeah. So job centers and navigators. Recipients able to work must attend regular interviews at public job centers. So I guess it's not just the training program, but there are public job centers where they have to go, where they are assigned an assistant known as a navigator who liaises with the companies to help them find a job or a training course. So there's really like your job when you're receiving this benefit, your job is to like go through all these things and find a job is what it sounds like. Like you do have a job and your job is to find a job almost.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So those are all kind of the conditions and restrictions and parameters of this thing.
Yep.
You guys want to get into the other articles?
Sure.
Yeah. So we've got that one. We'll do the first quote from this one. The new plan risks targeting the wrong people. The two most vulnerable groups in Italy are foreigners and families with lots of children. A household with one foreign-born member is almost twice as likely to be at risk of poverty or social exclusion than one where everyone was born in Italy. Similarly, families with 5 or more members are at far greater risk than smaller households. Only people resident in Italy for at least 10 years can receive the citizen's income. So I mean, this is an important point because it brings up the question of who do you care about?
Right.
Do you only care about Italian citizens?
Yeah.
And if you do care about Italian citizens, do you care about them being in communities where people are poor and desperate? So this is letting people be poor is bad for Italians too. I think in a lot of ways. So yeah, when it says targeting the wrong people, I mean, that's kind of a judgment, right? Like, who are the right people and who are the wrong people? If you say, well, the right people are Italians, then they're not targeting the wrong people. But
Right.
if you're thinking, well, people are people and you need...
But still, it would just be leaving some people out. I thought the phrase, I don't want to nitpick on a phrase too much, but it was
Yeah.
kind of an odd phrase for me.
That they're targeting the wrong people.
Well, because clearly anybody, I assume that's a low amount of money in Italy. Like, so I wouldn't necessarily assume that somebody who's not making, anybody in Italy who's making under that is necessarily the wrong person to be helping.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point here is that the people who need it the most
Yeah,
are
I know, I
maybe not the
understand.
people who are being
In
targeted.
Italy,
Yeah,
they're prejudiced against Roma and African migrants.
Interesting.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I was also imagining they might have some of the same political kind of debates over immigration going on,
Right.
where they wouldn't want to like offer a really strong incentive for a lot of immigrants to come.
But Roma have been
Yeah.
there for like hundreds of years, and they're still not citizens.
Or yeah, oh really? They're not citizens?
Because they have different citizen requirements. They're not. It doesn't matter if you're born there or not.
Interesting. So I guess this would apply to them because they've been there for at least 10 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. Would this apply to them? I mean, it's called a citizen's income.
Right.
So
But
would it apply to non-citizens?
It says that it does if they've been there for 10
Yeah, I
years.
guess it does say that.
I mean, resident in Italy could, I mean, there might be some like.
There might be other
technicality
restrictions, you think?
About that,
Yeah.
where we have like resident alien is different than other kinds of immigration.
maybe.
I don't actually know a
That's
lot
a
about the
good
status
point.
of the Roma.
Right, like
Yeah.
where do they draw the various lines, that kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Does it literally just mean living there or does it mean something else?
Right. Right, and the language,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Complicated.
Yeah, so I think you're probably right that the Roma would probably get it. Yeah.
Oh, it says the support for a household of one is very generous.
Right.
I'm just trying to get a sense of the amounts. I don't really
Well, I mean,
know
it's
cost
about
of
like 1,000 euros for a household of one. Or, sorry, 10,000 euros a year for a household of one.
Yeah, but depending on the cost of living, like I guess I live in Boston, so I have no sense of like cost of living.
I'm trying to give you the comparison between a household of one versus a household.
Yes, and I'm saying because I live in Boston, $10,000 a year doesn't sound like a very generous amount. But that's probably just because I live in Boston.
Are you Okay, so you're focusing on whether it's generous. You're not focusing on household of one versus household of two. That kind
No,
of thing.
sorry,
Oh,
I've
okay.
just been trying to get a sense all along of like what's the cost of living, just to anchor myself.
I mean,
like,
I
what's
think I think as in
amount?
America, it's very different in different parts of the country.
Exactly right.
So you know, $10,000 a year, I think, would
Right.
be very generous in some parts of America.
Fair enough. Yeah. And that speaks to your point about moving too, because like those two forces are probably working against each other. I'm guessing the places with more of the jobs are the places with that higher cost of living.
Right.
But your amount doesn't go up like when you move there. So that would like
Right.
also pull people away from wanting to move. You know, if they could game the system at all, they would want to like keep themselves in a cheaper, keep themselves in a cheaper rate.
The public school teachers in your San Francisco can't live anywhere
Right.
near to the schools they teach at.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So anyway, that's another factor. Interesting.
So let's bounce back and forth between the two articles.
Ooh.
So this is an interview with Philippe Van Parijs, and he's a basic income advocate. He says the expression reddito di cittadinanza is misleading insofar as it suggests that it is a universal benefit paid to every citizen rather than a means-tested benefit restricted to poor households.
Like beyond, I was going to say it seems beyond mean tested, but actually I don't know that much about how the benefits work here. But like compared to your food stamps example, for example, this is like way more intense. Like what they actually
in
have
terms
to
of
do.
the job centers and stuff.
Mm-hmm. The job centers having to go in, having to do all these things.
Yeah, and then another question we might ask is how feasible are these job center stuff, and would it end up being something more like?
Oh, like would it pan out the way they?
Would it end up panning out kind of like how it did here, because it's just not feasible to like put all these job centers together and have people like go through the this onerous process and everything.
Yeah.
So so it's hard to say what it would look like.
If they're anything like they are in the movie I, Daniel Blake, then they're really, punitive. And if you're 10 minutes late, you get kicked off the program and things like that.
Whoa.
Oh,
What's
wow.
that movie?
I, Daniel Blake.
Is it a documentary?
It's on Netflix.
Is it a documentary?
It's
Or like a drama kind of thing?
It's a drama sort of
cool.
thing.
Is it like a based on a real world time and place?
Mm-hmm.
Where does it take place?
England,
Okay. During what time?
like 2 years ago.
Oh. Okay, so like now. All right.
Yeah, so that'd be interesting to see more about what it's like. But
Yeah, that might be something for us to watch.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think this is right. It's not just that people are thinking about it like universal basic income because it's like a cash transfer.
Right.
They're thinking about it because it's literally called a citizen's income, which is something that in a lot of places is that term is equivalent to universal basic
Right.
income. It means the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But it actually seems like this is something they don't want you to stay on as an income at all. Like
Right.
they're hoping most people aren't on it.
So the name is somewhat misleading.
Yeah. It's almost closer to like not exactly a jobs guarantee, but it's like, it feels more similar almost to that with all this job training and like job matching.
Well, it's workfare, right? It's like,
Right.
We'll give you some money, on the condition that you try to get a job and are getting a job, and
like you said, if you consider this trying to get a job thing a job, and you have to do the community service, like they're basically giving you
it's
a job
almost
guarantee.
like a job guarantee.
They're
Yeah.
like making you do this work, and then you get the money for it.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. Yeah.
So yeah, it seems pretty far away from like a basic income. The more I think about it.
Yeah.
Or I already thought that, but now that I've seen the details even more so, I would say
Yeah.
it's like very much like if you're worried, for example, if you're like Andrew Yang and you're thinking about automation, taking jobs, or you already think we have more than enough jobs, this would be exactly the opposite of the program you'd want to put into place because it's clearly not addressing that.
So I think one thing to bear in mind while we look at this is that Italy is part of the EU. They have the euro as their currency.
Right.
So that puts some constraints on what they can do in their social programs.
Good point.
Yeah. So it's not like they can just pay out a basic income without having a tax to back it up. So that can be difficult politically, and the economics of it might not always work out either.
Yeah.
In terms of what's the penalty you're paying by taxing the economy and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. And we hadn't really talked about whether this actually is a good policy for Italy. Like we've been putting it down relative to a basic income in general, but it might help a lot of people, and maybe they need to have as few people on it as possible.
They also have freedom of movement in Europe, so if you find it too onerous, they can move to another country that has, better benefits, and they things like that.
Yeah.
That's true.
So then if Italy's benefits are lacking today, maybe the people who stayed are the people who just really want to stay and be in Italy.
Yeah.
Because all the people who would be better off somewhere else left.
Or don't. But you mentioned
wanna
the
be
startup
here.
cost of moving too can be.
Yeah, you can be too poor to move. It can be hard to get started in another city, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? I was leading to something.
I don't know. We're talking about whether. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think you could still have a basic income even if you need to balance it with taxes. I think you can have targeted benefits, but instead of targeting the benefits with the payout, with like only some people get the basic income.
No, you just compensate on the tax side.
Right. So you already have maybe a tax system that's progressive, takes more money from richer people or something like that. You just adjust the tax side so that it cancels out the basic income for the people who you don't want to be targeting. Now you've got the incentives of the government aligned with, trying to get it right, because, if they have to pay out a benefit, then, they might not be, they might not have the incentive to make sure that everyone who needs the benefit actually gets the benefit. But if what they have to do is they have to collect a tax, they're gonna, they want their money, so they're gonna try to get it right. They're gonna go after the people who aren't paying the tax, and then it's on the government. It's on the government.
They have a big tax problem though. Well, this is a separate point.
Italy has a big tax problem too.
Yeah.
But it does put getting it right on the side of the government. It's not like, oh, I need to apply for this program. I need to show that, that kind of stuff.
So
I do need to show that stuff when I report my taxes, but now it's up to the Italian government to make sure I'm reporting my taxes correctly.
Yeah. I think that's right in terms of aligning the incentives well and like being good for the society.
Yeah.
From the perspective of the government passing this, though, they might not want to put the onus on themselves. It kind of depends on their motive, like how much they actually care about helping versus looking like they're helping, I guess, is another way to put it.
So I guess you'd have to have like some political will. People would have to say, this would actually help more if you did it like this. This is better for people.
Right.
And then it would be hard for the government to argue, no, we can't do it this way. We want to do it this other way, because if the government's doing everything correctly, then you get the same result anyway.
Right.
If the government is not doing it correctly under a basic income, then people are paying less taxes. If they're not doing it correctly under a targeted program, then some people aren't getting the benefits they need.
Right.
And the people who have the capacity to kind of like navigate this stuff are not the people who need the benefit the most anyway. Right. And the people who you need to collect taxes from, the wealthier people, that kind of stuff, they're the ones who are maybe more used to navigating these kinds of regulations and stuff like that. So if you're a poor person and all you're getting is your basic income, you don't really need to think about, complicated tax stuff or anything like that. And it just makes it.
I agree.
Better.
I think it's much better to do it that way.
Yeah.
But I'm just, I guess, also thinking specifically in this context, like, why did they do it this way? And
I mean, in terms of answering your question about whether Italy would be better off with a basic income, even under the constraint that they have to make it revenue neutral, I would say that. Yeah,
you would do it that way. I understand now. Yeah, I agree. I guess there's a politics to it too, like this deep idea that people should work for their money. Like, even though what you're saying makes like total sense, it kind of doesn't go along with that ideal. If you're really giving it to everybody.
Yeah.
Also, you can't tax people who aren't working at all, right? I mean, I guess you could tax it back again.
I mean, the idea. I mean, you wouldn't tax it back again. You just give them less, I suppose, right?
Well, yeah, like I'm trying to think if they really also wanted to keep all these other incentives about like trying to make people work, then they could like tax it back if you don't work or something.
I mean, part of the problem with this program as it is here that they're doing now is that it destroys a lot of the incentives to work. So if you gave everyone a basic income, then if you get a job, that's going to be on top of the basic income. It's not going to be like, oh, well, we're just topping you off to a certain level. So even if you get a job that pays a little bit, it's only up to that level or something like that. So it removes a lot of the disincentives to work. And it gives people the freedom to work, and the labor market is a market. So I mean, like, I can understand this desire to say, hey, you have to earn your money, and we want to kind of force you to do it this way. But then you can look at it from the other perspective of the labor market as a market and say, well, how much labor do we need? How do we activate that labor? And that's looking at it from the other direction of what the market needs, instead of kind of like what you want people to do with
Right.
themselves from the bottom up. And I think that's going to be more efficient.
And even if you're constrained to balance the budget, you'd still want to grow the economy. Like then you could still give people more money, right? Because you're like collecting more in taxes as a percentage.
Yeah, I mean, when they
And-
spend their money, that's going somewhere, and yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think the amount of basic income you can afford to pay out is probably going to be lower if you have to balance it out with taxes, and then you have to figure out like what taxes are the best taxes and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It gets complicated.
Also, I'm trying to think like about the rate of spending.
The rate of
I'm trying to think about all the economics in this context where you need to balance your budget because you don't control the monetary policy. Like, I guess I'm thinking like, does it make sense actually now even more that they want people to spend it? Because like, if you have a limited number of dollars, but they can circulate as many times as you want,
yeah.
aren't you getting more benefit if they circulate faster rather than they circulate slower?
Yeah. So what's the
So they're
question?
making people spend the money in this program.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that might be particularly valuable in a budget constrained, balance the budget constrained context.
Yeah.
Faster circulation.
Yeah, to encourage faster circulation. Right. So you can't just solve the problem by giving people more money because you might not have the budget for that.
Right. But
Right.
it's the same as giving people more money to have it go faster if you're, in a way, right?
From the perspective of the productive economy, yeah.
And so if you just make it go faster,
So that
you're
might
like
actually
getting around it.
That might actually be a clever part of the plan that we like.
Mhm. Could
Yeah.
be. Just thinking it through.
Yeah.
It's like a workaround to a balanced budget to have money change hands faster, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just change hands faster, but it has to be going towards actual.
Well, towards productive,
Production
useful
or-
things
yeah.
that people want.
I mean, like ultimately, what we want is we want people to benefit the most, right?
Exactly,
So, just arbitrarily producing random stuff is not necessarily
Well, I don't mean
good for
that, but let's
people.
say that you have
Yeah.
productive capacity you want to tap into, and if you controlled your own monetary policy according to consumer monetary policy, what do you call your view?
Consumer monetary theory.
According to consumer monetary theory, if you control your own currency, you would just print enough money to up the production to the sustainable level.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, let's say you can't do that because you're Italy.
Right.
Would you want to try to get closer to that by increasing the rate of circulation of the money?
Yeah, and to answer that question, I'm saying we'd have to ask, well, what's the benefit to the people, right?
Isn't it the same as if you printed more money in the first scenario?
Well, people, when they save money, that usually benefits them to save money. They're doing that because it's benefiting them to do so, right?
Well, that's true. You're
So-
losing that benefit. Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, it's a complicated question. I don't know if I have the answer to it. I think it's yeah. I mean, you want to maximize the benefit that people can get from the economy. So the question is, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And forcing them to spend more money, I don't know, it does get more money into other people's hands, but you're also forcing those people to spend money to.
Right.
I don't know. I think this is it's a really interesting question that I don't have an immediate answer to, and I'd have to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the
Yeah.
velocity of money
Yeah.
and GDP.
Yeah.
If everybody has lots of money, but everybody is saving it, then GDP is low, even if everybody is rich.
Right.
Yep.
Whereas if everybody has whatever money they have, but they're spending it,
Mm-hmm.
then GDP is high. And in fact, they're spending the same dollar in many transactions.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
kind of getting at what I was getting at
And
too,
this
right?
is good, even though there might only be $1. But
Right.
if the velocity of money is fast enough, then everybody ends up happy.
Yeah.
So it's good if what you care about is GDP.
Yeah.
Right.
But if everybody's rich and everybody's saving money, then maybe we don't need to be producing all that stuff. So I think
Because
that's
they're making the choice, he's saying, to save it for some reason.
Right.
Yeah, well, I'm saying
Yeah.
that everybody, and maybe Italy, is obsessed with GDP.
I think you're probably right. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people in a lot of places are obsessed with GDP.
Yeah, it's a good
Um,
point. It's a good point.
Yeah, and that can be problematic because when we talk about GDP, we have to keep in mind why we care about GDP. Because if people are actually buying the things they want, then it corresponds to benefit for the people. But if you're just arbitrarily ramping up GDP, then maybe not so much anymore. Yeah, but I mean, generally your insight is right
I think one of the reasons why people are obsessed with GDP is because everyone else uses GDP, and If your GDP is high, then people are more likely to invest in your economy, which further increases your GDP.
That's true. It's the investment part is
Yeah,
relevant. Yeah.
yeah. So there might be some feedback
That's a
loops
good
like
point.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't, yeah. It would be nice to break out of that mindset a little bit, and keep in mind the ultimate goal. But your insight, Steve, is right that the amount of production in the economy is not. It doesn't correspond to the amount of money. It corresponds to the amount of spending, and that's going to depend on velocity and how much money there. Like all these things kind of factor into it. And I even think like we have all these statistics. Like how big is the money supply or what's the velocity of money? Depending on like M1, M2, and all of that stuff. I don't know how useful these individual statistics are, and I just like to focus on the overall volume of spending because that's kind of what matters. And then you can kind of like break that down in different ways. But yeah.
Oh, sorry. Keep going.
But I'm not sure how useful it is to do that. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just still playing with this question. Like, so if they gave people like something that was kind of the equivalent of food stamps,
Yeah.
and so it like wasn't really like, wouldn't that be a way to print money that they could do even as just Italy?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's ways to print money that aren't printing money. So Italy issues debt. They issue sovereign debt. All the European countries do.
Right.
That's denominated in euros. So that's a way of issuing an asset into the market and getting some money back. And now the people who gave you the money, they still feel like they have their money because they have this
Right.
asset that's paying some interest.
Well,
or
I was
something
thinking
like
about
that.
credit.
Yeah.
But in addition to credit, I was thinking about credit and debt things. But I was also
Yeah.
wondering, like, if they didn't, would it matter how they treated these cards and what was on them in terms of the fact that they can't issue their own currency?
Well, I mean, these types of programs still have to be funded. Like food stamps, it's dollars that you can only spend on food, but it's still funded by the government using regular dollars, right? Like if you're the store and someone spends the food stamps, you get regular money out of it.
Oh yeah, because they have to get it.
Yeah.
Right.
Now you can create derivative instruments on top of money that can be similar to money, like bank deposits, right? They're not issued by the government, but we treat them as money. Like
Right.
you go to the store and you use your debit card, and that's just a transfer of bank deposits from one bank to another bank, and
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is, that's controlled by monetary policy, and the monetary policy in Europe is controlled by the ECB.
Oh,
So Italy can't really decide to get banks to lend more or something like that. I mean, maybe they can through various regulations or something like that, but it's a little more complicated.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't even know if Italy has a lot of like untapped productive capacity or whatever. Honestly, I don't know much about Italy's economy, but
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I imagine that if you've got all these inefficiencies in the economy, then there's probably more capacity you can squeeze out of there.
yeah, I guess
Yeah.
with what changes, like would just giving people more money do it, or is it like I mean, of course, you can always improve productive capacity. I would think of that more as that, like if you change certain laws or like structures or,
Yeah, whether something is productive capacity you have now or
Right.
requires an improvement is just a matter of like what time scale you're talking about. Like
Right.
if you can ramp up tomorrow, is that part of our current productive
Yeah,
capacity?
yeah,
If you can ramp up
exactly.
in a week, is that part of our current productive capacity? Yeah. So yeah. But I tend to kind of think of that on a continuum.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
I think Italy could be doing a lot better. Yeah, and I think a basic income would help a lot. Do I think this will help? I think it's really hard to say. It's so complicated, and there's so many kind of perverse incentives.
It's hard.
Is it going to help people be better off? I mean, some people probably, but
It's hard to say.
overall,
It could. I mean, I could see an argument that it would. Like in the end, it's giving a lot of people money who really
Yeah.
need it.
so there's an argument that it would, and then there's arguments that it wouldn't. Like maybe the specific people who are receiving the benefit are better off, but now there's more inefficiencies in the economy in general,
everybody's
so
worse off.
everybody else is slightly worse off. That
yeah,
kind of thing.
and or like over enough time, it like hurts production even more. Or, like things get worse for everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know how it would play out. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that does not even depend on the design of the program. It depends on how it ends up being implemented, how inefficient it is, how much corruption there is, and all of that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a really complicated thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's interesting too, just going back a little bit to our Venezuela discussion.
Yeah.
So remember how like Venezuela had a particular way of nationalizing the companies that disincentivized production?
Yes.
So like Norway does something else, I think, with companies, and I should research into it more, but like I'm thinking of this in terms of like how successful is the government overall and like the details of implementation.
Yeah.
I think they just take like a large amount of like stock in companies that are successful or something, but like they don't take them over completely.
Right.
I think that's what the Norwegians told me when I was there. And so like they don't like this might seem like a detail, but actually like these details could make a big difference in terms of the incentives. So
Norway is an oil country, and
Right.
I read a really interesting article recently about the guy who helped them get it right.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because a lot of the oil countries, kind of like foreign, American oil companies come in and, kind of take over, and, it all ends up kind of going to the American companies, that kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
And they really structured it in a way that, Norway really structured it in a way that, the government was involved in kind of keeping it a Norwegian thing, but there's also, private companies within Norway that have like competitive markets and stuff like that. So
That's
they found
kind of
the
what
right
I'm
balance.
trying to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was actually a guy from Iraq
Really?
who moved to Norway because his son had cerebral palsy,
Whoa.
and the only treatment for it was in Norway.
Really?
Or the treatment that he needed for his son was in Norway.
Whoa.
So he was like a big oil guy in Iraq, and he didn't know that Norway had any oil or was working on
Right.
any oil stuff or anything like that.
Huh.
And he went to Iraq he went to Norway because of his son, and then he randomly kind of got off the train and went to check the government job place to see if they had any
Right.
interest in someone with his abilities and his experience. And then he was like, everyone was like, oh my God, like, cause this is like the person they were looking for, right? Cause they had just like started exploring for oil, and, they didn't
Interesting.
really know what they were doing. And this guy kind of like fell into their lap
Wow.
and helped them create a kind of a prosperous oil-based
That's
economy.
really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, there's a lot of contrast between Norway and Venezuela, but it is interesting they're both oil-based countries,
Yeah.
but they've done things very, very differently.
Yeah.
And from what you hear, Norway strikes kind of interesting balance
Yeah.
between like a productive economy where there's still incentive to produce more things, but also like do a lot of government funded like programs for people,
Yes.
like a tremendous amount.
Yep.
And they export almost all of their oil. Right?
I think so,
They're
right?
highly sustainable.
And they have
Yeah.
a sovereign wealth fund, which they use to pay their generous benefits.
Right,
Yep.
exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But someone was telling me that they also take a stocks in some kind of successful companies sometimes or something. Other
Yeah, I mean, I
companies?
guess that's the sovereign wealth fund.
Oh,
right?
that's what that
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
$2 trillion last year.
Yeah.
Do you know how it works, like in terms of when companies are forming or whatever? No,
not
I'll have to
really.
look into it. But anyway,
I
this
think-
was a bit of a tangent, but I guess I was agreeing with you that like if the government in Italy is not very successful at implementing things and like getting all the details right, then like that'll make a big difference
Yeah.
in terms of how it goes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. They could get it. They could get it right like Norway, or they could get it wrong like Venezuela.
Right.
Yeah. Not that they have an oil situation, but
But
yeah.
this particular thing and how
Yeah.
the incentives are going to work. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm totally telling Jared about this successful state intervention.
Oh yeah.
Next time.
In Norway,
He'd love
yeah,
that,
yeah,
yeah.
He would, he would like it.
Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't go far enough for him, I think. But
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. Good point.
Okay, let's do another quote here.
Yeah, sounds good.
Back to the other article.
Man, we have a lot of more quotes to get to.
So this is kind of like
Oh, we just did this quote. Oh no, we
we
did the quote.
quote
before,
from the other article,
before.
but it's very, very similar. So we don't need to get into this, but it's just the support for a household of one is very generous, but the additional money paid out for each child is proportionally less than before. A family with 5 children will get essentially the same amount as one with 3. This keeps down the cost of the 5-star plan, but it risks penalizing the most needy. So the 5-star movement is one of the main political parties. It's the most prominent political party in Italy. They have kind of like a coalition government, and there's the Lega Nord, which is kind of one of the other big ones, and they're kind of working together. But yeah, this is.
I have such mixed, complicated feelings about this particular question, which we talked about with basic income and how it would work.
The question of
like how to pay for each, like how it works with respect to the number of children that you have.
Yeah, I mean, should it even go to children at all is another question.
And also they're very much against abortion in Italy. So
right, because they're all Catholic.
Oh yeah.
So they're going to have maybe like 10 children or something.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like this is at least one way of encouraging people not to have too many children. But yeah, I mean, we pay. A lot of countries pay child benefits, right?
Yeah, they do.
Like, I mean, we care about children. We don't want children to be
exactly.
starving.
That's why I said it was a complicated thing. It's like you don't want the people to be doing badly.
Yeah.
But when I think about big global issues, like I don't know how big a deal it is in Italy really to worry about overpopulation or anything like that. But it's more when you get to the global scale that I think it really matters how you would set up your system.
Yeah. I mean, I think ideally the basic income would be high enough anyway that having a child is not something that would be unaffordable.
Yeah, that's my ideal. Is like nobody would starve on it even if they had a lot of kids, but then it wouldn't be dependent on the number of kids, so you're not kind of distorting the incentive with respect to that. That would be my ideal system. But if you don't have enough for that, then how do you do it? Like, I guess
if you don't have enough for that, then how do you do it?
I guess
I mean, my intuition still says that kids shouldn't get it.
Right.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, maybe you offer additional services for kids or something.
Yeah, I mean, you want the kids to be. You want the kids who are born not to be in poverty.
Exactly. That's where it gets complicated.
So yeah. So we're imagining a scenario in which we don't have enough money, or we don't have the resources. The economy doesn't have the resources to be able to productively respond to a basic income that's high enough to ensure that children aren't poor. So the question is there a way to ensure that children aren't poor?
Well, let's say you don't have the resources to ensure that like more than 2 or 3 kids per person, or 1 kid, I don't know, 1 to 2 kids per person. You know what I mean?
In India, there is a program where people get sterilized in exchange for like cars and things.
No way, really?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So they could do something like that.
They could. That's more intense than is comfortable for me. I'd rather find another one, but I guess that at least it's technically voluntary. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think more about it, and like, because sometimes simple things like birth control programs are also very effective for educating women and that kind of stuff. You don't. But yeah, and I guess if like you're just breaking even, it's not exactly an incentive to have a ton of kids on its own.
Yeah, I mean. The question is, I mean, if you can afford a high enough basic income that people can have 2 or 3 kids without living in poverty, it seems to me like there wouldn't be like
not that many people would go over that probably.
Not that many people would go over that, and there wouldn't really be this kind of tipping point. Like it would be kind of like a more gradual thing, like okay, now we have to stretch a little further, that kind of thing, and
right.
It would be this gradual
It's not like one extra kid and everybody's starving.
Yeah.
Or if it was, people probably wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and my feeling is that if you had a basic income that was that high, that So if we're talking about a situation in which it's a problem, it would be the basic income is so low that maybe you're already poor, and having a kid like pushes you over.
Right, like you actually do better rather than or like a perverse incentive would be like you're less poor with a kid than without, or with an extra kid than without. Would be a population increasing incentive, I should say. It's perverse.
Right, but we're talking about a basic income that doesn't go to kids, and then how would you ensure that kids aren't poor?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I agree.
So I don't know. That's an interesting question.
If you have education that's paid for by the state, then you can have a lot of kids, and it doesn't cost you more to send them to school.
That's true. Yeah.
That's true.
That's true.
But some of us think that some of us would like a lot of alternatives to traditional education, because we
Right.
think that traditional education is better.
Right.
So for those of us, we would like the kids to get the UBI as if it were an education voucher,
Oh, that's interesting.
and then they can pursue their own
Things.
education.
Right.
America and England are a bit more flexible. They have different kinds of schools,
Right.
but like Northern Europe is sort of only one kind of school,
Right.
and maybe in the whole EU they're sort of
One
very
kind of
into
school. Interesting.
one kind of traditional public education.
That's interesting.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that is interesting. Huh.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have far more resources that are available to be put toward education than we are making use of. And that's partly because we have this kind of like traditional way of
Doing it.
of thinking about how education should work and that kind of thing.
The other thing I was
Yeah.
talking to like a public school teacher about recently in terms of not how do we stop kids from being poor is like the burden has become, since kids are obligated to go to the public school she was saying is expected to do more and more and more things just in terms of like the social services for the kid, which it's not always designed to do, or the people aren't always totally trained to do, or it's like too much for the school to handle kind of thing. So that's kind of, and including like some of it's probably useful, but like, you can get free food there, but also like what social services and sort of like how much do you want to pile on to the school versus have independently.
Yeah. I guess another way of framing this larger question is what's the best way to put resources toward taking care of children without necessarily increasing the incentive for parents to have children?
That's exactly the question that we were asking. Yeah, exactly.
So that's an interesting question. I mean, if you can ensure that the benefits go towards the kid, and that would be like something like education vouchers or food vouchers for the kid or something like that.
I guess that's why I was bringing up the school too. Like right now, even we have a lot of those benefits that go to the kid because they're through the school.
Right.
Some of that's probably a good thing.
Right. I think some of those benefits are a good thing, but it would be nice if they didn't have to go through the school.
Well, that's what she was saying. It's just not quite. And
So maybe free childcare. So the parent is not necessarily going to be better off having a child and sending them to childcare. It's just going to be kind of like a neutral thing, but the child is going to be at childcare.
Free childcare would definitely increase the incentive to have more kids. I don't know
Why?
if that's a bad thing. Because your time is another limited resource that you're deciding about when you have kids.
Oh, so in terms of, so you'd be better off, the benefit of having a kid is that you really love kids and you want to have kids.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like it would be neutral because
it's
your
kind
life
of a
is
separate
exactly
point.
the same as before.
Yeah.
There's no monetary incentive there,
Right.
but there's still the
time incentive.
You're
taking away
you're
some
taking
of the
away
time
you're taking away some of the time disincentive. Yeah.
I don't know if that's really a bad thing.
And
but
there's a kind of this inherent incentive to have children. Like people want to have children, want to have families.
that's
Right.
one argument. I mean, we kind of debated this, and the other one, it's kind of
What?
unclear. In that, when we talked about population growth, we debated whether people have an inherent incentive to have like a ton of kids absent the constraints, or they wouldn't want to.
I'm not saying a ton of kids, but I mean there are
Right.
most people like want to have kids.
Right.
So if you make it so that it's not going to hurt them to have kids, then that's a net gain for those people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then the question is, do you want to provide a disincentive that counteracts some of that natural family
It
incentive?
kind of depends on your situation, I guess. Right?
Lots of questions there.
Sorry, I took us on kind of a
Yeah,
tangent.
no, that's fine. So let's do a quote from the other article. In the decades since World War II, many countries systematized much of the social assistance components into a general means-tested and work-tested guaranteed minimum income scheme. The previous Italian government's reddito di inclusione and the current government's reddito di cittadinanza are social assistance schemes of this sort. The second is at a far higher level than the first one. So yeah, I mean, I think just the point being made here is that it's a typical social assistance scheme.
Right.
It's not only higher than the previous one, but I think the restrictions on it are tighter
Interesting.
than the previous one as well. So does anyone have any comments on that, or we can move?
Just curious why things have gravitated in this direction, and if that's because this kind of thing is a better scheme than others that they had before.
Why things have gravitated in terms of higher payouts but higher restrictions?
No, sorry, why countries are generally moving towards a work-tested, general means-tested, guaranteed minimum income scheme. It's suggesting there's like a pattern there of like going towards that.
Well, I think the pattern is that they maybe didn't have a social assistance scheme before that, right? So it's not like they had a basic income and then they moved towards something like this, right?
Right. But they said they say they had social insurance and social assistance. Oh,
So,
yeah, and then they systematized
right,
this.
Right. So so there's social insurance and then social assistance. So social insurance is something you would pay into, and that would be like Social Security here in the United States. So that's something you pay into as a worker, and then you get the benefit out, that kind of thing. And then social assistance is just I mean, you can read it. It's a benefit that's funded by general taxation, and it's meant to help poor households who wouldn't have been able to afford to buy into the social insurance.
It's very
anyway.
different from insurance.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. That's fine. I don't really have anything.
Okay.
Move on.
To go back to this one.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know, right?
What? Is it really simplifying it? Because it seems so complicated. But maybe I don't know.
So
what
let me read the
thing
quote.
is. Sorry.
The idea of a citizen's income. This concept, a less radical version of the universal basic income scheme tried out by Finland, could in theory appeal to both the left and the right, the former because it might reduce inequality and the latter because it could simplify Social Security. So I think this is more reflecting the idea that people think this is more of a universal basic income.
Because then they go into the actual facts in the next paragraph. So this is more about the idea.
And I think when the idea was first proposed by the 5-star people, by Beppe Grillo, he was thinking of more of a universal basic income type thing. And so when it was named, when it was named citizens income, he was actually thinking of something that looked more like a universal basic income. But then it kind of, as the negotiations happened, it kind of morphed into this other thing, and that was maybe less effective.
It must be so hard to be a politician.
Probably pretty hard.
So frustrating. Like, it's so hard to get anything to happen.
It's hard to get anything done when you're not a politician.
Takes so many compromises and
Dude, compromise.
It's so much, right? Yeah.
It's interesting because compromise is important, but then you can go too far and compromise away any of what you were kind of hoping for.
But you can go too little too, and not under Nixon when they almost passed some kind of basic income thing, didn't think it was high enough. And, it's tricky.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to this one. Oh, so this is exactly what we're talking about. In some of Beppe Grillo's early formulations, there were explicit references to reddito di cittadinanza, ance universale. So ance means even, so even universal. So they're talking about having a universal citizens dividend, and a vibrant critique of assistencialismo, which is just welfarism, I guess.
Right.
So the idea of kind of the inefficient welfare state. So he was kind of railing against a lot of this, a lot of the stuff that we've been complaining about in this plan that his plan kind of morphed into.
Right.
And he's still the guy, right? He's still, the 5-star guy. So yeah, I don't know. I wonder what's going on in his mind. Is he frustrated by this, or does he still think it's better than what was before?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That kind of thing.
Oh, it sounds like it gives people more money, so maybe he just feels like it's still going to help people.
Yeah. Okie doke. This one. Unfortunately, the plan has. So they talk about it being radical. They talk about basic income being more radical. And I don't know. I don't usually use that word. But anyway, this one talks about it being revolutionary. So unfortunately, the plan has little of the revolutionary spirit of Milton Friedman's idea for a simple, guaranteed basic income for all citizens, jobless or not, and is more like a classic welfare to work program. After a deep recession and weak recovery, there's a strong case for helping Italy's left behind. The worrying thing is that this experiment becomes an administrative nightmare, making it harder to target those most in need. So yeah, administrative nightmare. You don't have any comments, or we can go to another one?
I guess only that I'd need to see what it was before to see if it's making it even more of an administrative nightmare, or if it's the same, or if it's, you know.
Yeah, my understanding is that this is more complicated,
Oh, right,
has
you said
more
that.
restrictions
Yeah,
than the previous
that seems
program.
tricky.
Yeah.
Do you include the third paragraph down there in one of your quotes? Because that would.
Let's see if it's the next one. See if it's the next one. No, I skip it. Let's read it though, because it's interesting.
The one that says the country, Richard?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
country clearly.
The country clearly needs to help its poor. About 1/5 of its citizens are at risk of poverty, according to the country's statistics agency, and 1 in 10 lives with serious deprivation. This is worse than in 2008, when the figures stood at 18.9% and 7.5%, respectively. Previous center-left governments passed a different support scheme, but it was far smaller than Five Stars program.
Yep.
So yeah.
I guess one thing I was just thinking in terms of the administrative nightmare is like they have all these administrative things to
Yeah.
try to make people get into the training and get the jobs. It seems like you could play around with the incentives in a simpler way to like have that be what people wanted to do anyway.
Have the training be what people want to do?
No, yeah, or have people finding their own jobs being something that the government didn't have to do directly, but rather like I have to think about how you'd want to set it up. But,
You'd increase the wages.
well, the government can't directly increase the wages.
They could do it like
Well,
yeah, Owen Cass, I think in that.
or in Cass.
I think he wanted to have work wage stipend or
Wage
whatever.
subsidies.
Wage
Yeah.
subsidies, yeah.
Yeah. The government could do something like that. But really, if you want to boost wages, labor market's a market. All they have to do is increase the wages if they want to hire people.
Right, but let's imagine you're worried that you want to increase people's motivation in some other way because you're worried about inflation or something like that.
You want to, yeah.
I don't know, I'd have to think about it.
I mean, generally speaking, I think it's on the employer to provide the incentive. Could you? I mean, and there's already plenty of kind of social disincentive to not be working. Like, how could like you're talking about like a blanket thing, right? To
I'm
kind
just,
of, like,
I don't know,
make
I'm kind
people
of
feel bad about
not being that
working
clear,
or-
but I was just trying
Yeah.
to think like, it seems like how they're doing it where they have to actually set up the centers and like have people monitor that people are coming to the training
Right.
and then like monitor that they're taking jobs when they're supposed to.
Really inefficient.
Monitor this,
yeah.
monitor that. Seems like not a good way to do it. I haven't
Yeah.
totally thought through like what their goals are and how else they could do it. But
So I mean, something like Oren Cass wage subsidy would be far more efficient, far less inefficient.
Right.
If your goal is to get people to work, it's unclear that you'd necessarily be getting more out of the economy, because now you're providing an incentive that the employer wasn't willing to provide, that kind of thing.
right.
So, you know, it's interesting
Yeah.
because if you say you want people to work more, because if they do, it means we produce more, but then you just, you know, directly target that, getting them to work more, it doesn't necessarily get the result that you wanted, which was more production or more output, more stuff for people to buy.
Yeah.
Does Andrew Yang have anything to say about government-sponsored job training, getting unskilled people up to
He
semi-skilled?
does. I mean, so I
Yeah.
haven't talked to him in depth. He's a pretty smart guy. I'm sure he has deeper things. The only thing I've heard him say about it is that as it functions now, it's not a good solution to things like the challenges of automation because the
Yeah.
success rate as it functions now at least is quite low. Like zero, that was what we were talking about, like 0 to
Okay.
15%.
Yeah.
So he mostly brings that up in the context of saying that people currently in politics are not taking these kinds of problems seriously enough because they'll often just say
Yeah.
like, oh, we should do more training, but they're not really even addressing the fact
But
that it's
he's
not successful.
Also,
Yeah.
there's the issue of when you complete your education, you're not the jobs that you're training for are no longer exist or
Yeah.
are
That can be a
changed so
problem.
much
So-
that it's no longer useful.
Yeah. So Andrew Yang is specifically, he's talking about retraining, reskilling people who were in, you know, kind of industry and how ineffective that is.
It's more specific
so
than what I said.
He does talk about he does talk about increasing the amount of like vocational training that's provided by schools and potentially having the government get behind that. I'm kind of skeptical that would be a useful way to go. I don't think people.
Vocational training is very useful in Germany.
You're saying it's very useful in Germany. There's a lot of it in Germany. I might disagree with the assertion that it's useful. I think like more than half the population, I think, goes through vocational school, that kind of thing, and then they're put in jobs. I don't know how useful that is to the economy or how useful that is to their society. They do have a lot of it, and it's often Andrew Yang likes to tout it as an example of things being done correctly. But
he also
I'm kinda
talks about
skeptical
the
of that.
basic income allowing
Yeah.
people to be like entrepreneurial, which isn't exactly what you're saying because it's not like government provided training, but I
Right.
think he sees that as though like you have a buffer for a while, so like you can take the risk.
Yeah.
Especially because he also is in favor of like Medicare for all. So basically you have this buffer where you wouldn't have to be working a particular job, and so you could either retrain yourself if that was available or like start a
Yeah.
company, something like that. I think he has this vision of the economy that's similar to what Richard said, which is like things are very fast and hard for a slow institution like the government maybe to like predict where the needs are going to be kind of thing.
Sure.
But I don't know. I
Yeah.
haven't really talked to him about it, so
Yeah.
that's my sense of what he might be thinking. But I guess he also touts these vocational programs, so I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could imagine a world in which normally you want businesses to be the ones to train the potential employees, and that's kind of efficient. But you can imagine an economy in which there's a lot of businesses who would benefit from people having a certain kind of training, and no individual one of those businesses wants to pay the cost for that training.
Right.
And then you could use maybe some government-sponsored vocational training to help get that part of the economy going.
The reason why the companies don't want to train other people is because those people can always go to a competitor and
Right.
they won't get the
Right.
benefits
Yeah,
from there.
that's exactly right. So you could imagine the government stepping in and training people to kind of alleviate that inefficiency.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, it's still important that we're thinking about it from what do we need out of the economy instead of kind of like what do we want people to do? How do we want to help people? I mean, because we want to help people, but we want people to benefit the most from what the economy is producing for them. And I think Andrew Yang has it a little bit backwards because he's thinking about we want to do this because the people need jobs. He's still kind of thinking of like people needing jobs, people having jobs as kind of like a good thing for the workers instead of thinking about, okay, well, how does it benefit the consumers? So I tend to focus on the consumers more, and I would like if he did too. So I can imagine a role for vocational training benefiting the consumers, but I'd really want to kind of frame it from that perspective. Yeah.
Right. Unless we're talking about like the purpose question that we've brought up, in which case it wouldn't have to be vocational training. It could be like other forms of education or enrichment.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a challenge. How do you give people meaning and purpose in their lives? And that's a really interesting question to explore. There's a lot of possibilities. I don't think the answer for most people is to make up work for them to do and force them to do it. I just, I don't think that's an efficient way to provide people with meaningful lives.
And it's not clear that there aren't any semi-skilled jobs left. There's sort of college level jobs.
It's
high-tech
interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting because he kind of like agrees with that and even talks about things like some law jobs and really high level jobs getting automated. But at the same time, he's into these like training programs, and I don't myself quite know how to put those two things together in terms of like what he actually thinks. But
Well, I think there are some inconsistencies in Andrew Yang's vision, and I think he's got so many different policies, and each one, he might not be thinking about how they all kind of relate to each other in terms of like some grander theory.
Right.
Like on some things he does, but
and maybe some of them are short term or some of them like some of them might have different time scales too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right,
I don't really know his mind. But.
So let's get some final thoughts about this Italy program.
Oh man.
Yeah, go ahead, Bethany.
I'm sorry I took us on so many tangents.
It's fine. I mean,
but
we're here to talk about basic income, and we use the topics as inspiration.
But I really enjoyed learning more about the program.
Yeah.
I guess the biggest question that came up for me that I would want to explore more, like intellectually, is like we talk a lot about a particular vision of a particular economy or country that controls its own monetary policy.
Yeah.
And in the EU, there are all these countries where the government is at one level for most of the policies, and then the economic policy is at another level.
Yeah.
And thinking about how to best design a program under that scheme seems tricky. And the
Yeah.
other thing that I would
And it would also provide us insights for how you could implement something like this at a state
level is the same
or at
idea,
the city
yeah.
level. We had a discussion on,
Right.
on implementing basic income at a city level. so-
Totally. Yeah. But I think one difference is that so many of the things that we think of as being controlled by the government are at this country level, but not the monetary policy, which is a
Right.
little bit different than like the state level in the US, where fewer of the policies are kind of controlled by that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I'm still not sure about is like, or one of the other things is just, in the end, is this a really great policy for the country that's going to help more than it hurts? And
Yeah.
how would we think about that? And just the actual realities of, like we were talking about, like when you actually have to implement something politically and it's like a major compromise every time, like how do you know if you're actually doing more harm than good or good than harm? Yeah, I don't know, it's tricky.
Elizabeth.
I don't think I have any additional thoughts about this.
Okay. Richard.
Well, like you said before, they haven't had a social assistance program for that long, and so they have to try this out before they can decide to transition to a basic income, and so that's what they need to do to decide.
Interesting.
Okay.
Cool.
Steve.
I think even if it works, it's not too informative an experiment in basic income.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think that simplicity is a good political tactic that maybe the Italian guy should have stuck with.
Right,
Yeah, I agree. So good discussion, guys. I agree that the Italy citizens' income is not a basic income, and I'm sorry that we contributed to the association of this program with basic income. But
By having this meetup.
By having this meetup, yeah.
Uh-oh.
But it was a good discussion. Next week we're talking about debt and credit.
Ooh.
So I'm pretty excited about that.
Gonna
one.
have some more
We're gonna be back on Wednesday.
consumer monetary theory next time, I bet.
So thanks everybody. Thanks Mitchell.
Did Mitchell have final thoughts? Oh no, you
He
closed.
did not give us
Okay.
final thoughts. I just need to stop streaming here.
Great.